"Ma'am, I'm sorry, you're not on the list." The words weren't cruel, they weren't loud, but they landed like a blade, clean and deliberate. I stood at the front gate of Norfolk Naval Command, where the sun glinted off the polished brass rails, and the breeze carried the sharp scent of the sea. Around me, the sounds of pride echoed, families, laughing bands, tuning children in small dress shoes, swinging their legs over the bleachers. Celebration was in the air. But not for me. The young petty officer double-checked his tablet, tapping the screen nervously now. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I had seen enough to know that this wasn't a clerical mistake. It was intentional. My name wasn't missing by chance. It had been erased carefully, strategically, with the same surgical precision I used in my work. Which was ironic, really. Because while my family was inside celebrating my younger brother's Navy Commendation Medal, I stood outside with 2 silver stars, hidden beneath a beige trench coat. They thought they'd buried me under admin titles and polite dismissals. They had no idea they'd built the perfect stage. That's when the black SUV pulled up. Out stepped my brother, Lieutenant Nathan Calhoun, shining in full dress. White's his hair perfect, his smile practiced. He saw me standing outside the gate. Saw the guard's hesitation. He didn't flinch, didn't step in, didn't say my name. Instead, he turned to his wife and smirked. She probably wandered over from admin. My sister's got a talent for spreadsheets. The guard looked mortified. I looked at my brother, and I said nothing. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because silence, I'd learned, is more strategic than sound, especially when truth is about to walk through the front gate uninvited. In every military household, there's an unspoken rank structure among the children. In ours, I was born 2 years too early to be the favorite. Nathan came along just in time to wear the uniform that fit our father's legacy. He was the kid who looked right in camo, the one who threw perfect spirals by age 8, who could recite the entire phonetic alphabet before I even had my learner's permit. Me, I was the quiet one. Not shy, just efficient, observant. The kind of daughter who got straight A's without reminders, who won math competitions without anyone noticing until a teacher emailed home. I was the one who turned off the lights after family parties, packed leftovers into containers, remembered everyone's birthdays. But those weren't the kinds of victories you framed on the living room wall. We grew up in the suburbs of Chesapeake, Virginia, just far enough from the naval base to pretend we were civilians, but close enough to hear taps every night at 10 p.m. Our father, a career naval aviator turned trainer, ran the house like a quiet outpost. Not loud, just structured. Everything had its place. Nathan had his, so did I. The summer Nathan got his acceptance letter to the Naval Academy, my father cried for the first time in public. At the backyard cookout that followed, he stood by the grill, one arm slung over Nathan's shoulders, like he was presenting the next American Idol of warfare. This one, he boomed to anyone with a drink in hand. This one's the next generation of Calhoun grit. Everyone clapped. I stood by the cooler handing out soda, smiling when required. No one asked about the letter I'd received that same week, one from a DARPA-affiliated science competition naming my algorithm among the top 5 cryptographic breakthroughs submitted by a civilian under 18. I'd printed it on glossy paper. I had even thought foolishly about taping it to the fridge. Instead, I folded it carefully and slid it into a manila folder already thick with unnoticed things. A few weeks later, I worked up the nerve to show my father a National Science Fair medal I'd brought home. Not because I wanted applause, just acknowledgement. He glanced up from his newspaper, took the medal in one hand, read the inscription without a word, and said, "You should help Nathan with his PT schedule. He's going to need every edge this fall." I nodded, went to my room, placed the medal inside a shoebox beneath my bed alongside an old spelling bee ribbon, a letter from a Stanford recruiter, and the first encryption key I ever built by hand. I still remember the feeling as I closed the lid. It wasn't sadness, it was confirmation. The Calhouns had already chosen their champion, and it wasn't me. But here's the funny thing about being invisible for so long: you become very, very good at studying people who aren't. I learned Nathan's patterns before he even recognized them in himself. When he was cocky, when he was insecure. The way he puffed his chest slightly when Dad was in the room, the way his voice dropped half an octave when talking about deployments. The way he needed to be watched, noticed, seen. Me, I learned to operate in the negative space, the places people forgot to look. The corners of the story no one thought to question. It made me a very dangerous person in the right profession. I remember the day I told my parents I'd been selected for the Naval Intelligence Officer Candidate Program. It was over dinner. Roasted chicken, garlic, green beans, and that boxed white wine my mother liked to pretend tasted expensive. I got in, I said, folding my napkin slowly. Office of Naval Intelligence. I start in September. There was a pause. My father set down his fork, blinked once. In intel, yes. He cleared his throat. That's support. My mother chimed in gently. It's still service, James. He didn't look at her. It's not real warfare. It's computers and headphones, paperwork. The Calhouns don't do support. I could feel my face flush, not with embarrassment, but heat. Contained heat. I'll be working in cyber ops, I said. High-level command structures, real-time decisions, strategy, integration with tactical units. It's more than paperwork. He looked at me like I'd told him I was applying for a job in retail. Nathan, to his credit, didn't say anything that night. He just chewed his food, smirked once, and the conversation shifted as it always did, back to field deployments, leadership training, and the rotations Nathan would be eligible for next spring. I knew my place. But what they didn't know was that Oni had already fast-tracked me. Because while my family thought I was chasing a desk job, the Office of Naval Intelligence thought I might be something far rarer, an operator who could navigate both data and danger. Someone with precision, pattern recognition, patience. They were right. I didn't tell my parents when I was pulled into a task force rotation within 6 months. Didn't mention when I received my first mission commendation. Or the night I led a real-time operation tracking arms movement through Eastern Europe using a network of ghost servers no foreign agency could trace. Why would I? They already had their hero. Let them have him. Let them believe I was the girl with the tidy cubicle and the stack of reports. It worked in my favor. Every time Nathan laughed about my spreadsheet command center, he reinforced a useful illusion. Every time my father said, well, at least it's a safe job, he reaffirmed a layer of protective fog. They had no idea what I did inside the tank. No clue I had been one of only 6 officers cleared for Operation Winterglass, a mission so classified it didn't officially exist on any Pentagon server. They didn't know I once watched a SEAL team's vitals flatline on screen, only to stabilize after I rerouted a drone strike with 12 seconds to spare. They didn't ask, and I didn't offer, because silence is a weapon, and invisibility when wielded with purpose is power. There's a room 4 levels underground buried beneath a federal building in Washington, D.C., where the walls are lined not with maps or portraits, but screens. Curved, luminous, data-rich screens stacked edge to edge, pulsing with encrypted comms, satellite visuals, and algorithmic overlays. It's called the tank, though no one calls it that outside classified circles. On paper, it doesn't exist, but inside it hums with the weight of real-time consequence. That's where I work. No windows, no sunlight. Just recycled air and the quiet buzz of purpose. We don't salute in there. There are no nameplates, just call signs, silence and clarity. And inside that clarity, I am Shadow 2, second in command of a black cell attached to ONI's Joint Operations Division. My team doesn't wear uniforms. We wear constraints clearance levels that make most doors stay locked forever. We're the ones who see the battlefield before it begins, not on the ground, but above it, around it, through it. There are no medals for what we do, only outcomes, and some of those outcomes have names like Viper Team Bravo. I remember one night in particular, a Tuesday that blurred into a Wednesday somewhere over the Red Sea. Our screens lit up at 0200 hours with a piracy situation, civilian oil tanker hijacked by a cell linked to illicit weapons trade. 12 crew on board, 3 American engineers. Viper Bravo had boots within 100 nautical miles. Command wanted options. I was running point. Feed thermal data to Eagle Watch, I said, eyes flicking across heat maps. I want full movement overlay on the deck and the bridge. My voice was steady, always was. It had to be. Every order I gave had a consequence, sometimes measurable, sometimes not. But never theoretical. From the comms, Viper Bravo standing by for breach clearance. I scanned the bridge. Something didn't feel right. Too much heat concentration in one quadrant. A skiff nearby, dark engine off, drifting too perfectly. I zoomed in. Confirmed number of heat signatures on the bridge, 7 shadow. And outside the hull starboard side. 6 more cold vessel but armed. I leaned in. Abort, now. My voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Viper Bravo. This is Shadow 2. Do not engage. You have a secondary hostile force positioning for ambush at your 6. Repeat, fall back now. Silence. Then Roger that Shadow. Disengaging. The screen blinked. The skiff lit up with movement. We rerouted a drone strike. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. No American casualties. 12 lives saved. You won't read about it anywhere, but I remember. What I also remember is what happened 20 minutes later. My personal phone buzzed in my pocket. Not the encrypted comm. Just the regular everyday device I used for pretending to be the version of myself my family believed in. It was a text. From Nathan. Hope you're enjoying the museums, M. Try not to fall asleep at your desk tomorrow. I stared at the screen. The emoji made it worse. He thought I was in DC, sipping overpriced coffee battling spreadsheets. In reality, I had just overridden a tactical strike that would have killed him and half a SEAL team if the data stream had been delayed by even 30 seconds. I turned the phone off, slid it back into my pocket, and went back to the screen. Because emotions don't belong in the tank, and family doesn't belong in war. But it lingered with me, that text. Not because it hurt, not anymore, but because it confirmed how well I had played my role. They thought I was harmless, peripheral, a supporting character in a story that belonged to Nathan. They had no idea the story was mine. A few days later, I was summoned to the Pentagon. The kind of summons that doesn't arrive in email. It comes through a knock on your shoulder by a silent courier with a hand-delivered folder. Inside, one name, Wallace Marcus, General 4 stars, Commander of Joint Strategic Operations, the kind of man who sees everything but rarely speaks of it. When I stepped into his office, I wasn't sure what to expect. He stood by the window looking out over the river, a cup of black coffee in his hand. The walls behind him weren't lined with awards, but with maps, photos of soldiers, places most people couldn't locate on a globe. He didn't waste time. You saved 12 lives the other night, he said. I stayed silent. He placed the coffee on his desk. We've been watching your work for a long time, Calhoun. You've built something most officers twice your age couldn't dream of managing. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He nodded like he respected that. Operation Winterglass is being declassified, in part. Enough to speak your name aloud. That stopped me. Winterglass wasn't just a mission. It was a multi-year dismantling of a global financial web funding terror groups through third nation shell firms. I'd led its digital arm for 4 years. Quietly, ruthlessly, effectively. He smiled. The Navy is nominating you for the Distinguished Service Medal. The room stayed silent. I didn't breathe for a moment. Then he said it. I know you've been invisible. I know that invisibility has been armor. But sometimes, Admiral, sometimes it's okay to take the armor off. He leaned back in his chair, then added, Your brother's ceremony is next month, isn't it, Norfolk? I nodded. His smile widened just slightly. How poetic would it be? To honor both Calhouns on the same day. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't text Nathan. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat in my apartment, lights off, city buzzing outside, and thought about how silence had always been my strength. But now it would be my entrance. 3 weeks before the ceremony, my mother called and used the voice she reserved for social obligation disguised as maternal warmth. We're doing something small for the 4th, she said. Burgers, hot dogs. Nathan's bringing some friends from the base. You should come. It'll be good for the family to be together. I almost said no. I could already see it, the flapping flags, the overcooked meat, the men in Oakleys talking about deployments, while the women carried potato salad in glass bowls, like offerings to the altar of masculine valor. I knew what my place would be, somewhere between the condiment table and the shadow of my brother. But I said yes, because this time, I needed to see it. One last time, in full detail, with open eyes and no illusions. I needed to feel it before I decided how to break it. The Calhoun backyard hadn't changed since high school. Same cracked patio, same string lights looped between the porch and the old oak tree. Same gas grill my father claimed was still better than anything they make now. When I arrived, my mother met me at the door. She was wearing her favorite flag-patterned apron, the one with the stars faded from too many washes, and handed me a tray of buns before I could even say hello. "Can you take these out back, sweetie?" Of course. By the time I reached the patio, Nathan was already holding court. 3 men surrounded him, 2 in navy khakis, 1 in a civilian polo shirt that still somehow screamed Annapolis grad. Nathan was telling a story, a familiar one. And the fog rolls in, and we've got this unmarked skiff drifting in from starboard. No lights, radio silent. I'm thinking this is it. This is the moment. So I give the call, everyone tight eyes open. He spoke like a man auditioning for a movie. I knew the report behind that story. Knew it wasn't him who spotted the skiff. Knew the real intel had come from an anonymous "Oni intercept my intercept." Knew he'd been below deck when the order came through to abort the breach. But facts don't matter when you're the one holding the beer and everyone's leaning in to listen. My father stood nearby, arms folded, beaming like Nathan had just landed a fighter jet in the driveway. I placed the buns on the picnic table and didn't say a word. Later, when the sun had started its descent, and the sky burned orange behind the tree line, my mother caught me in the kitchen under the fluorescent glow of the overhead light. She pulled a casserole dish from the oven and said, without looking at me, "Jessica really takes such good care of Nathan. He's lucky to have her. Some women just have a gift for making space for others." I leaned against the counter. "Mom, what is this about?" She turned all innocence. "I just want you to be happy, Emily. I know your job matters, but don't forget to leave room for life." She said life like it was something I'd forgotten, like it came in a box with a ring inside or in a crib with the right last name. Like all I'd built in the shadows was a temporary waiting room until a husband walked in to collect me. I didn't answer. There was no point. We rejoined the others on the patio, just as Nathan raised a toast over the dessert table. Cherry pie store-bought. He lifted his beer like it was a saber. To service, he said, smiling wide. And to the people who do the real work on the front lines in the dirt, not just behind the scenes. His eyes flicked toward me, just for a second. Then he added, "No offense, Em." The group chuckled. It wasn't the laugh that stung. It was the expectation that I'd laugh along with them. I didn't. I smiled that same smile I'd worn since childhood. The one that said, "I'm fine. I belong here. I accept the role I've been given." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not snapped. Shifted. Like tectonic plates. Like something slow, enormous, and inevitable. I stayed until the fireworks started. Sat in the same old plastic chair I'd occupied since I was 14. Watched the same red, white, blue explosions paint the same sky. But my mind was somewhere else. In the dark. With screens. With maps. With names. I drove home in silence, windows down the warm July air, wrapping around me like a second skin. When I got back to my apartment, I changed out of the sundress I wore for their benefit, and slipped into a black long-sleeve shirt, pulled my hair into a tight knot, and sat at my desk. I opened the file I hadn't touched since General Wallace handed it to me. Nomination Distinguished Service Medal, Rear Admiral Emily Calhoun. It was real, my rank, my medal, my moment. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted alignment. I wanted the world to stop pretending I was someone I never agreed to be. So I opened a blank document, and I wrote 3 words at the top: Ceremony Contingency Alpha. Then I outlined the plan, not for drama, not for confrontation, but for clarity, the kind that doesn't come with shouting matches or kitchen interventions, the kind that arrives without invitation and stands under the lights until no one can look away. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not Wallace, not my team, not even myself really, because deep down I knew the truth. The most powerful correction isn't an argument, it's a presence, and mine was coming. There are moments in life when time doesn't slow down, it sharpens, not like a movie scene with swelling music or theatrical gasps. No, the real kind, the kind where every detail comes into focus with painful clarity. The sun suddenly feels too bright, the breeze too artificial, the silence too exact. Like the universe itself is watching, waiting to see if you'll flinch. That was me. Standing at the main security gate of Norfolk Naval Command, watching the petty officer in front of me squint at his tablet. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "You're not on the list." I said nothing. Because I already knew. He tapped again, confused. I've got Calhoun James, Calhoun Margaret, Calhoun Jessica, and Lieutenant Nathan Calhoun. No. Emily. Each name was a hammer, polished, surgical, familiar. And then there was the absence mine. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. The young officer looked back at me, and I could see at his discomfort the creeping realization that something wasn't adding up. I had the posture, the bearing, something in the way I stood that didn't match forgotten sister. But he didn't have the clearance to ask the right questions, so he defaulted to protocol. I'll have to ask you to step aside, ma'am. I nodded once, took 3 steps back from the gate, and stood to the left in the shadow of the sentry post. No protest, no expression, no scene. Because that's what they expected. And that's what I was about to detonate. Minutes later, I heard it before I saw it. The engine of a black SUV, government-issued, custom-polished, moving with that distinct low hum of vehicles that don't belong to civilians. It pulled up to the gate like it owned the asphalt. Out stepped Nathan, in full dress whites. Every ribbon perfectly aligned, hair sculpted, posture trained. He looked like the poster boy for a Navy recruitment ad. He scanned the entrance and saw me, saw the hesitation in the guard, the confusion, the pause, and he smiled. Not kindly, not even smugly, strategically. Like someone enjoying a checkmate he'd been planning for months. Then he turned to Jessica, his wife standing just behind him in a conservative blue dress, with her signature pageant-ready smile. Probably wandered up from admin, he said loudly enough for the guard and me to hear. My sisters never quite understood where the front entrance is. Jessica chuckled. Because she knew her role. The guard looked horrified. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My parents stepped out next. My mother immediately busied herself with her pearl necklace. My father adjusted the lapel of his jacket. Neither of them looked at me, not even a nod, not even a glance. They walked through the gate as if I weren't standing there at all, as if I were just another misplaced civilian. A mild inconvenience they hoped wouldn't draw attention. It wasn't new. But it hit harder than I expected. Because this wasn't childhood. This wasn't a missed science award or a forgotten birthday. This was deliberate erasure made formal with a guest list and a guard. The petty officer glanced back at me, visibly sweating now. He opened his mouth probably to apologize again when another vehicle arrived. This one didn't hum, it purred. A jet black sedan with chrome trim and a license plate that meant something, though not to everyone. The kind of car that said I'm not just invited. I was expected. It stopped exactly 10 feet from the gate. The rear door opened, and General Marcus Wallace stepped out. 4 stars on his shoulders. The kind of presence that doesn't require introduction. You know him by the silence he commands. His eyes swept the scene once. He didn't acknowledge the guard, or the SUV still idling behind the checkpoint. He locked eyes with me, and he smiled. Admiral Calhoun, he said, his voice warm, commanding, impossible to misinterpret. There you are. We were starting to worry. The petty officer froze, literally, like someone had just whispered the nuclear launch code in his ear. Admiral, he stammered, tablet trembling in his hand. Wallace stepped forward, placing a hand gently on my elbow. You ready? I nodded once. His voice dropped quiet enough only I could hear. You good? Want me to handle anything? I tilted my head just slightly, eyes still forward. That won't be necessary, sir. And together we stepped past the guard. The gate swung open with a hiss and a click, a mechanical exhale that might as well have been the gasp of everyone watching. Because by then they were watching, all of them. My father, who had already turned but now stood still. My mother, who finally looked up. Jessica, who blinked. And Nathan, whose jaw had tightened just enough to give him away. He knew something was wrong, but not what, not yet. I didn't glance at them, didn't nod, didn't break stride. Wallace walked beside me, casual, confident, like this was just another day. But he knew. He knew exactly what we'd just walked through. A quiet battlefield, and I had won without raising a voice. He led me down a side corridor past the ceremonial lawn into a small room tucked behind the main stage. The door closed behind us with a soft thud. Silence, no windows, just a mirror, a leather armchair, and a table with a pitcher of ice water. I stepped forward and faced the mirror. unbuttoned the trench coat slowly, underneath my full dress whites, pristine, precise. My 2 stars gleaming like truth incarnate. I pulled the pins from the velvet box in my satchel, fastened them to my shoulder boards, one by one. Click, click. I stood there for a moment, not posing, just existing. Fully, finally. The girl who used to deliver buns to the grill had become the woman who just walked through the front gate with a 4-star general and needed no introduction. The glass hadn't shattered, but I had heard it earlier. A soft, sharp sound, like time ticking towards something inevitable, something earned, something that would never be erased again. The waiting room behind the stage was colder than it needed to be. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed like a dormant engine, but emotionally. Designed for pre-show nerves, for nervous spouses, for briefings that didn't require conversation. A room built not for waiting, but for transformation. And I was about to transform, not into something new, into something that had always been there, just hidden behind a beige trench coat and 1,000 acts of family compliance. I adjusted my collar in the mirror, straightened the hem of my dress whites, smoothed the creases of my trousers with a flick of my palm. Every motion exact, surgical. Then I opened the velvet-lined box. Inside 2 silver stars. My rank insignia. Rear Admiral, United States Navy. The pins were heavier than they looked, dense, with weight that couldn't be measured in metal, only in silence, sacrifice, and unrecorded victories. I affixed each star slowly. Left shoulder, right shoulder, click, click. Each click was a line drawn in history. The door opened behind me. A junior officer stepped in, eyes respectful but sharp. "Admiral Calhoun," he said. "We're ready for you. VIP seating front right. 2nd row." I turned, gave a simple nod, and followed. We walked down a side corridor, cool, windowless, lined with framed photographs of past honorees. Men in medals, women in crisp blues. Names I recognized, names I'd briefed. Some of them had no idea I'd once pulled them out of danger from behind a wall of glowing monitors and code. We emerged into the main hall. Ceremonial music played softly from the band in the far corner. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the polished floor, filled with families, officers, civilians in expensive suits. Light streamed through the high windows, painting gold across shoulder boards and dress shoes. And then I felt it, the shift. The moment people noticed me, it wasn't immediate. It started as a ripple, a whisper, a tap on the arm, a slow double take. Then came the silent recalculations. You could see it in their eyes, recognition chasing reason. Why is she in that uniform? Wait, is that 2 stars? Rear Admiral. Here I walked past a row of captains who instinctively stood to attention. I nodded once, accepting but not inviting. Then I saw them, my family. Front section, left aisle. My father sat rigid in his chair, back military straight, but his face crumbling. His program was folded in half in his lap, forgotten. My mother blinked at me like she was seeing a ghost. Jessica had her hand on Nathan's arm, but he didn't move. Nathan. His mouth parted slightly, just enough to signal a question he didn't know how to form. His eyes were fixed not on my face, but on the stars. He understood the meaning, but not the math. This wasn't possible. Not his sister, not the admin, not the afterthought. I didn't look at them again, didn't offer a nod, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. I simply walked past them, each step silent but final, and took my seat beside General Wallace in the VIP row. He leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Nicely done." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had never said I was coming, but I had arrived. The ceremony began on time. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, a captain in full dress voice, clear posture, perfect. He welcomed everyone, spoke about honor, tradition, excellence, the usual language of military pageantry. Then came Nathan's name. Lieutenant Nathan Calhoun, for meritorious conduct during joint operations in the Gulf, is hereby awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. Polite applause filled the room. Nathan stood. He walked to the stage with precision, shoulders back, chin high, the posture of someone who's been applauded all his life. The master of ceremonies pinned the medal to his chest. A handshake, a nod. Then Nathan stepped to the microphone. His speech was rehearsed, practiced humility, careful gratitude. He thanked his chain of command, his team, then turned toward the family section. I want to thank my father, Captain James Calhoun Rhett, who taught me what it means to serve, and my mother, Margaret, who kept us steady no matter what. A glance at Jessica, and to my wife for always holding down the fort. Another pause. His eyes swept the crowd. They passed right over me. No name, no sister. Not even a glance. I didn't react. Not visibly. But inside I felt something dissolve. A final thread. The last lingering expectation that maybe after all this he might say my name. He didn't. And I realized that was the best gift he could have given me. Because when General Wallace stood and approached the podium next, the room didn't know what was coming. But I did. And so did he. The applause for Nathan still lingered as he stepped down from the stage. It was polite, measured, the kind you give to a solid officer with a promising record. He smiled the way he always did after a performance, confident, camera ready, nodding at the people he expected to remember his name. He walked back to his seat, like a man certain the ceremony was over. But General Marcus Wallace was already standing. He didn't rush. He didn't clear his throat. He simply moved to the podium with the controlled ease of a man used to command. The band quieted. Conversations hushed. Even the air seemed to pause. "I'd like to take just a moment of your time," Wallace said. "We have one final recognition today. One that was not listed on the program, and for very good reason." A murmur rippled through the room. Wallace continued, his voice deep, measured. "Much of what happens in the world never makes headlines. There are operations, people, outcomes that remain hidden by necessity. Their success depends on discretion, their impact measured in lives saved rather than press releases issued." He paused, letting the words land. "We've just honored a brave young lieutenant for his meritorious service. But today I would like to draw your attention to another form of service, one that lives in the shadows." Heads turned, eyebrows raised. Nathan sat forward slightly, a crease forming between his eyes. Wallace kept going. "There exists a tier of operations in the United States Navy so classified even some in this room are not cleared to know the full extent. Today we recognize the officer who led one such operation, Operation Winterglass." A stillness fell over the audience like a velvet curtain. I felt every head slowly turn toward me. Wallace's voice dropped a degree, low, deliberate. The operation, now partially declassified, was responsible for disrupting a global terrorist financing web that spanned 4 continents. Over the course of 3 years, this officer's leadership directly prevented the transfer of weapons, the movement of money, and the deaths of thousands. I heard a sharp inhale from somewhere behind me. Then he added without theatrics. "And just last year, during a piracy threat in the Red Sea, the same officer's intel and real-time analysis prevented a SEAL team from walking into a trap. 12 lives were saved." Another pause. The silence was deafening. He stepped aside from the podium just enough to turn toward me. "Rear Admiral Emily Calhoun." The name landed like a detonation. There was a full second where no one moved. Then, almost instinctively, the entire military section of the audience stood. Captains, commanders, chiefs, Marines. Every uniformed body rose in unison. Protocol, respect, reflex. Only 3 people remained seated. My father, my mother, Nathan. They looked like they'd been struck. Frozen. Their expressions somewhere between disbelief and unraveling realization. Wallace gestured for me to rise. I stood without hesitation. Walked to the stage in silence. The applause was thunderous now, no longer polite. It was reverent. Wallace opened a small velvet box and removed the Distinguished Service Medal. The light caught the gold just as he pinned it to my uniform. He leaned in just enough for only me to hear. "Now the whole room knows." I nodded. He turned back to the microphone. "This," he said, addressing the audience, "is what leadership in silence looks like. This is what happens when brilliance, discipline, and conviction combine without the need for spotlight. For over a decade, Admiral Calhoun has been the force behind missions that altered the trajectory of global threats. Then came the final blow. Some of those missions," he said carefully, "involved saving the lives of people in this very room, including unknowingly her own brother." Gasps. I didn't turn, but I could feel the collapse. I could feel the air leave Nathan's lungs. He knew exactly which mission, exactly which call, and exactly who made it. Wallace stepped back and gestured for me to speak. I didn't have a speech, but I didn't need one. I stepped to the microphone, scanned the room slowly, then said, "I've served my country without needing to be seen. I never asked for acknowledgement. Because I believe the mission mattered more than my name. I let that sit. But sometimes, clarity is a form of service too." I paused, then looked directly, deliberately at Nathan. And truth doesn't always need a microphone. Sometimes it just needs to walk into the room. Then I stepped away. The applause rose again, but I barely heard it. I walked back to my seat beside Wallace, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn the chair I sat in. It had been mine all along. They just hadn't known it yet. The reception hall buzzed with the kind of energy that followed a revelation. It wasn't celebratory. Not entirely. It was recalibrating. People adjusted their posture around me. Conversations softened as I passed. Uniformed men and women approached me with measured handshakes and phrases like, "It's about time and hell of a reveal, Admiral." Every face that turned toward me did so with a kind of awe I'd never seen before, not because I had changed, but because they'd finally been forced to see what had always been there. My silence had spoken louder than 100 speeches. At the far end of the room, General Wallace was deep in conversation with a senator. He caught my eye briefly and gave a nod that said, "Let them come." Because they would. And they did. I saw them making their way through the crowd, 3 figures moving as one tightly bound not by unity, but by shock. My father led. Chin set stride, measured jaw, clenched in something between pride and disbelief. My mother followed, still clutching her purse like it might anchor her to some older version of reality. Her smile was gone, replaced by wide, darting eyes that scanned the room like she was searching for a reason, a glitch, anything to explain what she had just seen. And behind them came Nathan, his eyes locked on mine. He didn't blink, didn't speak. Not until they reached me. "Rear Admiral Calhoun." He said, his voice too loud for the space between us. He used the title like a curse. That was quite a display. I didn't answer, didn't flinch, didn't give him what he needed, something small, something warm, something that could help him control the narrative again. "You let us believe you were a glorified secretary," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "You stood there while we made jokes, told stories. You let me get up on that stage and say your name didn't matter." He was unraveling. Because this wasn't about shock anymore. This was about shame. "You let me lie to that room without knowing I was lying," he hissed. "You made me look like a fool." "No," I said calmly. "You did that all by yourself." My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on Nathan's arm like she could hold him together. "I think we should speak in private," she said softly. General Wallace's aide appeared without being summoned. He was well trained. He gestured toward a hallway. "We've reserved a conference room if the Admiral prefers." I nodded. The 4 of us followed. The hallway was quieter, carpeted. Pictures of decorated warships on every wall. We entered a room with a long table, 8 chairs, and a pitcher of untouched water. Nathan didn't sit. He paced. "I don't understand," he said. "How long have you? Why didn't you?" He stopped, breathing hard like he'd just run a sprint. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked," I said simply. My father, silent until now, finally spoke. "We would have supported you." "No," I said, looking at him. "You would have tried to redefine it. You would have said it wasn't real service. You would have said it didn't count because it didn't leave footprints in sand or trigger a weapon." He opened his mouth, closed it. Nathan dropped into a chair across from me. "I told that story about the skiff in the Gulf," he said slowly. "I thought I saved the team." "You saved no one," I said. "You were being walked into a trap. I saw it. I aborted it. You lived because I was watching." He blinked, and for the first time in his life he looked small. My mother sank into the chair beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know you didn't want to know," I interrupted. "Every time you asked about my job, it was with a tilt of your head, with a tone that made it clear you were waiting for me to admit it was a placeholder. That I was waiting to be rescued by a husband or a baby or something else you understood." I leaned forward. I didn't want a ceremony. I didn't need your approval. But you erased me and I let you for years. Because it was easier. Because I thought that if I ever said the truth out loud, it would sound like arrogance instead of fact. I stood. "This isn't about revenge. It's about recognition." They didn't speak. None of them. Then my phone buzzed. Not my personal one. The secure one. encrypt it. Only rang for one reason. I looked down at the screen, then back at them. I have to go. I turned hand on the door, but paused one final time. I don't need anything from you, I said. But if you want a relationship with me moving forward, it begins with respect. I walked out before they could answer. Because I wasn't waiting for answers anymore, only action. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that felt almost too quiet. No dramatic slams, no raised voices trailing me down the hall. Just soft carpet under polished shoes, and the faint echo of ceremony music still playing somewhere in the distance. I walked steadily. My body still held the stillness of that conference room, the walls, the stairs, the weight of 3 people trying to reconstruct their understanding of me while I was already gone. The difference was, I didn't need them to finish. I didn't need a reaction. They'd spend the rest of their lives processing what I'd just delivered. I had work to do. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected for Virginia in the late afternoon. A subtle wind moved through the flagpoles that lined the perimeter road behind the ceremony hall, tugging gently at the fabric of my uniform, like a whisper, asking, what now indeed? I checked my secure phone again. The message was brief coordinates. A timestamp, a single code word I hadn't seen in over a year. Emberlock. That wasn't coincidence. I walked across the lot where senior staff cars were parked past rows of sedans with license plates that belonged to the Joint Chiefs and Congressional Defense staffers. Mine wasn't among them. My vehicle was waiting at the curb behind the officer's mess, unmarked dark blue, a quiet government-issued Ford that blended in anywhere. The driver was already at the back door, holding it open without a word. Admiral, he greeted. Take me to Joint Base Andrews. Yes, ma'am. Inside the car, the leather was cool and worn in the right ways. The scent wasn't new, but clean. A car that had carried people who mattered to rooms where consequences were born. I leaned my head back as the engine hummed to life. We pulled away from Norfolk Naval Command. I didn't look back, not at the gates, not at the field where the flags flew, not at the brick buildings that held 1,000 pieces of my family's idea of greatness. They were welcome to keep their memories. I had my own. And mine had weight. 20 minutes into the drive, my phone buzzed again. This time it was General Wallace. Wallace. You okay? I smiled faintly. Me. I've never been clearer. He replied almost immediately. Wallace. Good. They'll adjust. Or they won't. Either way, you don't belong behind them anymore. I looked out the window. Sunlight filtered through the glass, slicing the world into gold and shadow. We passed fields, fences, gas stations, and then stretches of nothing. That in-between space, neither civilian nor command, where most people live their whole lives without realizing it. I'd spent too long in that space, trying to be seen, trying to be small enough not to offend but big enough to maybe count. Not anymore. By the time we reached Andrews, the sun was sinking low. The tarmac shimmered in the distance. A C-40B transport aircraft sat waiting stairs, already deployed cargo crew standing at attention. My next assignment wouldn't be on the record. It never was. But I didn't need my name etched into history books. I just needed the right people to remember. The driver pulled up beside the aircraft. I stepped out without hesitation, saluted the waiting officer at the foot of the steps, and climbed. Inside the cabin was quiet, half passenger, half command deck. Screens embedded in the walls, secure comms terminals. Just enough seats for a senior intel team if needed. But tonight I flew alone. I took my seat near the window. The engines powered up with a low, comforting rumble. As the aircraft lifted off, Norfolk disappeared beneath me, shrinking into abstraction. And something inside me shifted too. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel wounded. I felt clean. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of what they didn't see in me. They'd seen it now. Whether they understood it or not was no longer my problem. I looked out the window into the darkening sky and whispered to no one in particular. Let them keep their silence. Mine has already spoken. 6 months passed. Not rushed, not slow. Just enough time for reality to settle where shock had lived. I didn't hear from Nathan for 3 of those months. Not a call, not a text, not even one of his half-clever gifts he used to send when pretending he wasn't still jealous. My mother sent 2 emails. The first was a recipe, the second a weather update from Richmond. Neither mentioned the ceremony. I answered neither. Until last week when I received a hand-addressed envelope, no return address. Inside a single sentence written in my father's precise all-caps handwriting. The house is different now, no signature, no date, but I understood. So I went. Not to forgive, not to reconcile, to witness, to see if anything had actually changed, or if they were simply trying to rewrite the narrative to feel better. The driveway looked the same. So did the door, but the moment I stepped inside, I noticed something. The wall beside the living room couch, the one that had always displayed my father's medals, had been redone, not just rearranged, rebuilt. The old wooden case was gone. In its place stood a new display cabinet, taller, glass-fronted, custom-lit from above. Inside, everything was still in military order. My grandfather's Bronze Star, my father's Navy Cross, and on the center shelf at eye level, my Distinguished Service Medal. Just beneath it, in the same polished brass as the others, was a mounted silver nameplate. Rear Admiral Emily Calhoun, Strategic Operations. ONI, 2012 present. I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed the validation, but because it wasn't there for me, it was for them. To remind them every day of what they hadn't seen, and what could no longer be ignored. My father walked in from the kitchen carrying a small microfiber cloth. He said nothing as he gently wiped the corner of the display case. We didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Then he cleared his throat. I built it myself, he said quietly. Didn't trust a company to get it right. I nodded once. He stepped back, looked at the case like it was still drying. First time the walls told the whole story, he added. I turned. My mother was standing in the hallway. In her hands a plate of warm cookies, chocolate chip, the kind she only made on birthdays. Just came out of the oven, she said. Thought you might like them. I added sea salt. You always liked them that way. She smiled. Not the strained kind I remembered from childhood. This one was small and real. I took one. The three of us stood there for a few moments in silence, surrounded by the smells of butter and memory and something softer than the air used to feel in that house. Later at dinner, there was no toast to Nathan, no monologue about deployments. Instead, my father asked me a question he had never asked in his life. What's the hardest part about managing people that smart at that level? I blinked. It took me a second to realize he was serious. Their egos, I said eventually. And the fact that some of them want to be seen more than they want to be right. He nodded slowly. I wouldn't have lasted a day, he admitted. It was the closest thing to praise he'd ever given me. Later on the porch, Nathan appeared with 2 bottles of beer and offered me one without speaking. We sat on the old wooden swing we hadn't shared in more than a decade. The night was quiet. Just the sounds of wind and the hum of a distant lawnmower somewhere down the street. It took him a long time to speak. When he did, his voice was low. I wasn't ready, he said, to know, to admit it. That you weren't just good. You were something we couldn't even explain. I didn't interrupt. I think I needed to be the star, he added, and I didn't know how to share the light, especially with you. So I pretended your work didn't matter, because if it did, then everything I'd built in their eyes wasn't enough. He turned to face me barely. I'm sorry, I didn't rush to respond, but I looked at him and said with no heat, no bitterness, I don't need your apology. He swallowed. But I do appreciate it. And we sat like that for a long time, saying nothing more. Just 2 people who had finally stopped performing. Dinner that night was quieter than I remembered, not in a tense way, just still. There was no running commentary on military budget policy. No Nathan rehashing some deployment anecdote in slow motion detail soaking up the table's attention like a sponge. No background hum of competition wrapped in family dynamics. Instead, we ate. We passed bowls without commentary. We said please and thank you like civilians. And for the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful. At one point, my mother asked if I still drank wine. I said yes. She poured me a glass of Cabernet with steady hands. It was such a simple gesture, but it meant more than any toast could have. Then after the dishes were cleared and the second round of coffee poured, my father turned to me, not across the table, but directly like a peer in a briefing room. Emily, he said, using my name with intent. How do you manage when the decisions you make don't have clean outcomes? I looked at him. He wasn't asking as a father. He was asking as a man who had commanded lives. You weigh everything I said, but in the end, you act. And you own the consequences, even when the consequences are silence. He nodded, then leaned back, his hand wrapped around his mug. Sounds like command. It is, I replied. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was explaining my job to a civilian audience. I wasn't simplifying. I wasn't reducing my choices to metaphors they could digest. I was speaking from my post, and they were listening. Later that evening, Nathan joined me in the den. I was thumbing through one of my father's old flight logs, stored in a box under the coffee table, when he sat beside me. I've been implementing a new decision protocol on the ship, he said casually. Something I picked up from a briefing out of PACFLT. Structured decision trees, operational memory compression, keeps officers from overthinking in high-tempo ops. I raised an eyebrow. He hesitated, then admitted I borrowed some of it from a redacted file I saw once. Winterglass. You left fingerprints. I didn't laugh. But I let myself smile. He smiled back almost sheepishly. Kind of wish I could take credit, he added. But I know where the good stuff comes from now. There it was. Not surrender, not worship. Just acknowledgement. The next morning over breakfast, my mother slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside clippings, news articles, printouts of press releases, a declassified summary of my medal citation, photos of me on stage of Wallace pinning the ribbon to my chest. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me as I turned the pages. I didn't know how to talk about you, she said finally. For years I'd tell my friends you worked in D.C., but I never had the language. You weren't supposed to, I said gently. It was classified, I know. But I let that become a reason not to look deeper, not to ask. That was my choice. She looked at me directly, and I regret it. It was the first time my mother had ever apologized without cushioning it in a compliment or a baked good. I closed the folder. I'm not looking for regret, I said. I just want accuracy. She laughed quietly, spoken like a true analyst. Later, as I prepared to leave, my father walked me to the car. The same man who once told me intelligence work was support, a word he made sound like failure. He opened the trunk, placed my overnight bag inside, then stood by the driver's side door. I told a neighbor last week, he said, almost casually. About the ceremony, about your medal. First time I've talked about it out loud. I waited. He looked at me. He didn't believe me at first. I tilted my head. Did you show him the nameplate? He smirked. I told him to Google it. Then after a pause he added, I'm proud of you, Emily. Not because of the rank. Not because of the operation. Because you did it your way. Quiet, sharp, unflinching. It hit differently coming from him. Not because I needed it, but because I no longer did. Which made it real. I got in the car, rolled the window down. Dad. Yeah, I'll be back. He nodded once. Next time he said, bring a challenge coin. The Marines keep asking if the ghost in the white uniform was real. I smiled, shifted into drive, and pulled away from the house that used to shrink me. Now it stood behind me, still standing, but no longer above me. With revised opening for timeline clarity, that night I didn't drive far like I thought I would. A slow loop around the block. And then I came back. I'm not sure why. Maybe closure isn't always a clean exit. Maybe some endings need a softer landing. So we sat on the back porch like we used to. Same old wooden chairs, same hum of Virginia summer. The porch light buzzed faintly. Crickets somewhere far off. That kind of stillness that only happens when no one feels like proving anything. Nathan handed me a glass of iced tea. Not beer, not a joke, just tea. We didn't speak for a while. Then he said, I keep replaying that moment. When you walked through the gate, the stars, the silence, I think. That was the first time I actually saw you. I stayed quiet. I thought I understood this family, he went on. Dad was the axis. I was the legacy. And you were the backdrop. He gave a dry laugh. I wasn't just wrong. I was arrogant. Still, I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to fix him anymore. He looked out into the yard. The same trees, the same worn shadows. I needed applause, he admitted. I thought that's how I mattered. But when you walked in that day silent and people stood anyway, that wasn't power. That was dignity. Finally, I looked at him. You don't have to say everything tonight, I said. Just be honest with the parts you do. He nodded. Slowly, deliberately. I'm proud to be your brother. I let it sit between us. No deflection, no dismissal. Then I said softly and truthfully. And for the first time, Nathan, I can say the same. We sat there a little longer, not as the golden child and the ghost, just two people relearning what it means to begin again. In the months that followed, everything quieted in a way that didn't feel like absence, but peace. The family group chat changed tone. No more one-sided updates about Nathan's deployments. Now there were forwarded articles about cyber intelligence. Quiet questions from Dad. What's it like briefing a 4-star, or how do you build a team when you can't explain what you do? I answered when it mattered. Other times, I let the silence speak. One Sunday morning, my mother sent a photo of the living room shelf. She'd rearranged the books, right between Profiles in Courage and The Art of War. She'd slipped in a hardcover copy of a policy white paper I'd contributed to my name on the spine. No caption, no emojis, just the picture, and it meant more than any speech. The next time I visited the house felt looser somehow, like someone had finally cracked a window open after decades. Nathan and I talked about leadership now, about failure, about when to speak and when to observe. It wasn't mentorship, it was conversation. He told me once I used to think power came from being seen first. Now I think it comes from being the one who doesn't need to be. I smiled. He was getting it. As for me, I went back to work. Back to the tank, back to maps and screens and operations with no names. But something inside had shifted. Not my mission, not my loyalty, just my relationship with myself. I no longer needed to hide behind silence. Now I chose it. Because it was mine, not theirs. Some stories end with applause, some with medals, some with tearful reconciliations or dramatic confrontations. Mine ended quietly, with respect instead of resolution, with clarity instead of permission, with a family that still had scars, but also the decency to stop pretending they weren't there. And that was enough. I don't know what they tell people now, my parents, their friends, their neighbors. But I know this. They don't leave my name off the guest list anymore. They say our daughter is in intel, and they don't look away when they say it. My brother doesn't tell stories at my expense. Sometimes he tells mine. Coded respectful. And when people ask if I'm the Admiral in the family, he doesn't flinch. He says she earned every stripe. Every single one. I like the way that sounds. Not because it's pride, but because it's true. I live in a world that doesn't clap, that doesn't print headlines, that doesn't pause for applause, but that's okay. Because I've already stood in the room, I've already worn the stars, and I've already watched the people who once erased me finally learn the cost of pretending I was small. I didn't demand recognition. I didn't scream for justice. I simply walked in and let the truth arrive with me. And now I walk on. Wherever they send me next, whatever conflict waits in the shadows, I'll face it the way I always have. Quiet, focused, unshakable. Because I no longer walk with doubt in my chest or apology in my eyes. Only presence, only clarity, only silence, the kind that doesn't need to be explained to carry weight. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with a look that lingers, a silence that's no longer awkward but earned. A presence that finally takes up the space it was always meant to occupy. Emily Calhoun didn't need revenge. She didn't need to shout. She simply walked through a door they tried to keep shut and let the truth speak for itself, not with noise, but with authority. And that is the lesson. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives dressed in silence, trimmed with clarity, and backed by years of being overlooked. If you've ever been the quiet one, the underestimated one, the afterthought in someone else's story, then maybe like Emily, you don't need their permission anymore. Maybe you just need to walk in and be undeniable. At this channel, we honor stories like hers. Stories where strength doesn't come from screaming, but from standing still and refusing to shrink. If this story moved, you stay with us. Subscribe, follow, come back. Because next time, the story might sound like yours. And when it does, we'll be here to tell it exactly the way it deserves to be told.